This is very possibly the most impressive game I have ever seen, and I think I'm done with it. Hey, I'm Alex Ratcliffe from Board Game Co., and this is my review of Sleeping Gods from Ryan Lockett from Red Raven Games, an epic storytelling, sandbox adventure game of, well, sandbox exploration. The goal in this game is to find a bunch of totems to wake the sleeping gods, and ultimately to kind of go along those wishy-washy lines of what you are and are not supposed to do as you wander across a whole bunch of event cards, a whole bunch of phases of the game, until you eventually all sort of die, or alternatively you accomplish your quest, finding one of these story endings, running out of time, any number of different things along the way. It's very sandboxy, it's very open-ended, it's very go around and do what you want as you try to explore, as you flip through this gigantic book full of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of interactions, interweaving interactions, that, like I said, this is possibly the most brilliant game I have ever seen designed. I'm trying to think genuinely of all the games I've gone through, and this is one of the most intricate experiences. The idea that this is done by a husband and wife team, the idea that the art, the story, the game, the mechanics, the way that everything links together in such a way that you have this giant choose-your-own-adventure, but structured in a way that you can do whatever you want, go wherever you want, you can proceed along the pathways in different orders, and the game has a quest system that will give you a whole bunch of different keywords on these quests, keywords that will define for this journal what happens, what your interactions are, and how you proceed. You wander up on an island, and then you have a choice of how you're going to interact with that island and what you're going to do, except that choice is very dependent, because if you've actually spoken to the old man in the other village 2 pages away, then now you know a little bit more, and now suddenly you have a new pathway, a new option on that island. Now you can choose a new thing. If, let's just say the word old man, if you have the keyword old man on one of these cards, you can go ahead and start proceeding down a different side passageway and have an entirely different interaction on that island than if you hadn't. The game constantly has, again, hundreds of cards. We have hundreds and hundreds of quests full of all that information, full of just keywords and story and little hints as to what's coming, but all of those defining how you will interact with the world around you. This game is, it has a lot. It has an amazingly amount of content in this game. I'm probably around 10 hours into this. I would guess I'm halfway to 2/3 through a full game being somewhere around 20 hours, basically going through your event deck 3 times. I'm most of the way through that, and I don't feel like I've scratched the surface of this world. Like, genuinely, I don't feel I've scratched the surface. This game has pages of content, and you're like, pages of pages? They're like, what, 10 pages there? That's not that much, but if you dive into the game, that's a ton. These pages, every single one of these pages has little interactive story points, and every single one of those interactive story points has a way that everything links together. If you go here and then you go there, that has a different consequence than if you go here and then there, or if you go here, then there, and all of this, of course, is very dependent on the choices you make in this journal along the way. Who you choose to sacrifice, who you choose to engage with, whether you choose to run from beasts or try to go further into the lair. Every single thing you do in this game has a consequence. You bring the prince back, and do you try to sneak into the palace, or do you instead announce him to the castle guards? There's a ton of things you can do in this game, a ton of options and story and pathways that you're trying to engage with here. The general turn structure, when you're actually going through this procedurally, is you take a ship action over here, which will be one of a bunch of ship actions that you can take, mostly giving you these little cubes that you can spend for a variety of benefits. From there, you're going to go ahead and deal with the event phase. We'll draw one of these cards, dealing with the good or bad things that come along with that, and then finally taking 2 actions over here from traveling, exploring, market, and port. Travel is going to involve moving your ship around the board. Explore is going to involve most of the interactions you're going to take, as far as engaging with all these little numbers here. Market allows you to go through the market deck, which I have somewhere in all these decks of cards here. I have the market deck over here, the market deck, going through the market deck and potentially using the money you've been earning along the way to buy a bunch of things. And then port, at specific actions, you can take port actions as well. There's a ton of options as far as how you can interact with this world, as far as how you can interact with the different things. And then a bunch of other aspects we haven't even touched upon even remotely, and this is not a full how to play. You'll have a ton of characters. You have 9 characters over here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 characters that you're going to be utilizing their various skills, utilizing their benefits. They all have different perks, different ways you can spend those stamina tokens, and different ways you can engage in combat, different combat bonuses you can have as you engage with a variety of enemies, because you'll have all these enemies over here, and there's a combat sequence of as far as how you utilize your characters to try to attack the beasts, avoid being attacked back, and then the various enemies you're fighting off will attack you as well, and you're trying to be mindful of taking them out, actually killing them, versus weakening them. Hit them in their arm and they may do less damage to you, but that may not be how you actually kill them. So you have a choice. Do you just rapidly try to destroy them as soon as possible, or do you try to weaken them so that they're dealing less damage as you slowly pick them apart? And those combats get worse and worse depending on the level of what you're fighting or how many things you're fighting in the game. There's going to be a ton of item cards you can earn through a variety of things, from the various totems you're seeking itself, from various goods you'll get as a consequence of various interactions and adventures, to the market deck, all these giving you different ways to spend your stamina tokens, to spend various resources or food or different things in the game, just giving you different ways of interacting with this game, different ways of modulating and managing how your ship ideally does not die, how your crew does not die, being mindful of damage and being mindful of just the currency, all the various currencies you have to deal with as you try to explore through this world, because at the core of the game, you have choose your own adventure. That's what this game is. It's a choose your own adventure experience as you move your ship around the board, as you manage all the various consequences of moving the ship, as you engage with different locations and make different choices. That's the core idea. You have this book, you flip through it, you go ahead and you say, do you go ahead and raid the village, or do you visit the people in their huts? And obviously I'm very peaceful, I visit them in their huts. And then you flip to page 182 and then you're like, well, now that they're in the huts, do you go see the old man in the village, or do you go run after the child in the corner? Well, I'm definitely going to run after the child because he seems like he's playing with something. The child has X, Y, and Z. Well, if you have the keyword this, this, and this, you can now suddenly take that little map from the child, and if not, it's a full narrative pathway of different options that will unlock as you explore this world more and more, all of which that basically means you will not even see nearly the full amount of this universe before you're done with your first playthrough. There's a ton of game here. Every single page is hours and hours and hours and hours of gameplay. Which is a good time to start moving to my opinion of Sleeping Gods. And again, I have not finished the game, take that into account, but I am 10 plus hours into it, so take that into account too as far as where this goes, because like I said at the very beginning, I think Sleeping Gods is one of the most incredible games I've ever seen designed, and it's one that there are elements of it that I absolutely adore, and there are elements of it that have me feeling like feeling like it's holding me back from fully experiencing this. As far as ease of play, let's start off with ease of play, which I usually go to in my reviews, but ease of play, this game is incredibly easy to dive into. There's an excellent little how to play guide that guides you through a few adventures, that gives you a good feeling for exactly what needs to happen in this game, for the way interactions work. That's the plus side. So you can dive into your first, half an hour in the game incredibly easily, incredibly guided, very, very accessible. The downside is, once you're done with that, you kind of have to read the rulebook anyway. It's good in the sense that it gives you a good taste for the game, and it makes the rulebook more absorbable, because you have all that information that you've just done. At the same time, you still need to read the rules. Not very complicated rules, but you will still need to go through that. And then as far as table space, it can start to get a little messy. Not the worst by a long shot, but it can very quickly start to get a little crazy over there. And then as far as ease of play, the thing I do want to focus on is, I wish there was an app. And I checked. I haven't seen an app. I looked online. I could not find any indication that there is an app or not. But this book over here is absolutely incredible. And the stories and everything that goes on in this book is amazing. With the one downside that as you continuously flip through adventure after adventure, and certain interactions more so than others that really have you going through a sequence of 7, 8, 9 choices, the amount of flipping back and forth from this page to that page to this page to that page starts to get a little much. And the book is specifically structured to not be linear. It's specifically not linear. You'll be jumping from 42 to 176 in 2 seconds from one location to the next. And so that's very intentional the way the book is presented, so you don't get a good feel for, how any interactions plays out, how long an interaction is. It's all over the place, for better and also for worse. As far as player count, I've only played this game at 1 player, which is a factor in my opinion, because I think that 2 players might be the sweet spot for this game, and I have reasons why I think that. I'll get into them as I go through my pros and cons and all of that. It's a 1 to 4 player game for context. I can't imagine wanting to play this game with 4 players, even with 3. I think 2, though, would add... You see, a single player game makes this a very accessible storytelling game that you can jump into and just play through at your leisure. Very accessible, very easy to dive into it solo. At the same time, there are specific complaints as far as how I experience Sleeping Gods that I think would be improved upon if I had another player to share their experience with me. But again, it's all conjecture because I've only played this as a single player game. As far as what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking, this is the most incredible sandbox game I have ever seen. I'm trying to think of the others I have seen, and I'll have them in my recommendations at the end, but as far as the nature of what this game does and how it does it, I think I can say safely that this is the most impressive sandbox game I've ever played. There are a bunch of adventure games out there, there are a bunch of storytelling games out there, but the way you can genuinely dive into this game and start off on this starting page as much as you want, or alternatively, literally as soon as you have a chance, flip to the next page and start engaging in this section over here. You see, the way you play through the game is very abstract. There's not a defined goal. There's simply find totems. And finding totems, for the most part, usually involves going through certain story points, finding certain story beats. Interact with that location. Somebody there tells you about something you might find over this location. If you head to this location, well, maybe if you found a pearl in this rocks along the way, then maybe something else will happen. Maybe you'll find something in this tornado that you wouldn't have found if you hadn't stopped over here and talked to the old woman there first. This sequence of story points as you go through one thing to another, leading down certain chains, will inevitably result in you finding totems along the way, gathering these little totems, which are just otherwise, they're event cards. The goal is to try to gather them, but you're trying to get these things, and they all involve playing off multiple story beats. But there's not a defined do this in order to win the game. There's a defined don't do this so you don't die, but past that, adventure, explore, interact, and you can do all that. Your first set of actions can be going to this page over here, where you might find yourself a little lost, at least if it's your first play. Alternatively, you can explore this starting page over here, which is what I recommend if it's your first play. I think this is likely a very guided situation, that more guided so than the other pages, but all of them have different connections. All of them have different things as far as the various elements you've interacted with. And the game is structured enough so that you can't be completely crazy. Because you might be sitting there thinking, if all these interactions resolve based on what other interactions you've had, what happens if I just wander several pages deep and it requires something I've done on this page, but I haven't done something on this page? And the answer there is, for the most part, many of the interactions page to page do follow some degree of interconnectedness within that page. Not necessarily 100% within that page, but there's enough interconnectedness that it feels like going to a new map region. It feels like you're on that new board, and now you're suddenly going to engage with a point, and that will connect you to somewhere else on that board. As long as you follow the hints, the very gentle hints that the quests give you, this very much is a sandbox adventure. And they are gentle hints, that you don't have to. You can completely go from one page here, then go to the next page there, and just wander all over the place, completely ignoring any form of guidance that the game gives you, and you'll probably lose. I mean, you probably will lose if you completely ignore the idea that there is some sort of story beat going on here. Which story beat you choose to engage with, that is more up to you, but if you completely ignore it entirely, I can't imagine you would do well at this game. So this game is genuinely the most impressive sandbox game I've seen played, both in terms of the way it doesn't force you down a specific path, as well as the way it interconnects things so that the sequence of play that you have just makes it incredibly impressive. And the story is engaging enough. I say engaging enough and not just straight up engaging, because the nature of having that kind of all over the place means there isn't some driving story that's driving things forward. As opposed to that, you kind of have these little side stories. You're exploring a world, you're becoming part of the world, and it feels like you are. It feels like you've been dropped into this world that you can now explore, engage, interact, and start picking up bits and pieces of the characters, the backstories, the villages, the people, the whatever it is around you. But there's not some, world-ending doom that's going on. There's you finding out what's going on in this particular story. You finding out the back drama of why that person got expelled from that palace, of why that village is being attacked by rats. There's all these side stories, but they're all their own separate elements. And so it's a very engaging story, but within the context of not having an overarching story, rather just multiple smaller, interconnected, engaging stories. And all of that is incredibly, those are the primary things of what I like. There's a lot else going on. There's other cards, there's interactions as well. There's ways you can be managing or mitigating battle. There's ways you can be trying to, gather various adventure cards or gather various market cards and using those to survive. There's a whole bunch of other elements. But the main reason I would recommend that you play this game is because of the sandbox adventure game going on here and the choose your own adventure that is just incredibly impressive and fun to go through. As far as what I don't like, it's pretty much going to come down to all the things that stop me from getting to the things that I do like. Because Sleeping Gods is incredible. It's absolutely incredible, there's no question about that at all. At the same time, there are many elements of the game that are just okay, and they stop me from engaging in the storytelling as much as I would like to. There's a lot of tedious maintenance going on in the game, tedious maintenance that very much does feel like tedious maintenance, at least to myself. Combat is completely uninteresting to me. Combat is just something I have to get through in order to get to the end of that combat and then go to the next story beat. Combat is just this little puzzly sequence, and it's not a bad puzzle. It's not a bad puzzle, but it's not the most engaging puzzle I've played either. And so it ends up being this kind of halfway point of a decent mechanic thrown in that kind of gets in the way of me actually engaging with the story. The maintenance of your crew, the maintenance of your ship, keeping everything alive and running is a fun little puzzle, and occasionally gathering more cards that help you with that puzzle is not bad. It just, again, it gets in the way of me actually playing and engaging with the story, engaging with the sandbox journey that is being presented here. The fact that you are flipping through this journal and constantly having to go from point to point to point and not being able to just move directly through the story. Again, this is like, I mean, I wish there was an app. I wish you can just tap, go to the next, go to the next, go to the next, instead of flipping through page after page after page. These are all things that just get in the way of an otherwise incredible game, an otherwise incredible experience that has a whole bunch of good but not great stuff thrown in that gets in the way. That's really what I don't like about the game. There's nothing inherently that I don't like. There's just a whole bunch of things that are okay along the way. As far as what I can see others not liking, for one thing, it's a guided sandbox. Like I said already, it is a sandbox, but it's guided. You can't completely just wander off going from here to here, ignoring any semblance of story. You will die. I'm fine with that. I don't need the complete chaos of wandering, doing nothing. I like the fact that I could suddenly go 2-3 pages in and then start exploring this realm. I like the fact that I could do that, but I will still explore that realm. I'm not trying to just wander off crazily. If you want a fully 100% sandbox, this game might not be for you. Additionally, you're constantly doing checks from this deck over here where you're going to be flipping these over and doing skill checks against random numbers that range from 1 to 6 in that deck. Granted, the 1s and 6s are a little less common, but still the 2 through 5 is just, I mean, there's a large range of how these skill checks can pay off, and this book is full of skill checks. Test your perception, test your crafting, test any number of different attributes again and again and again. And yes, you can level up your characters to make that better, but that again goes to the fact that all comes down to feeling a bit like a okay aspect. I don't mind the skill checks, to be very clear. It's not the skill checks that bother me in and of itself. It's the things that get in the way of me experiencing the game are what bother me. The fact that there's a wide variance between 2 and 5 on these cards, and you can between 1 and 6 on these cards, and you can just be all over the place with no real strong ability to plan. That's a different story entirely. As far as final thoughts on Sleeping Gods, this is an excellent game. But it's an excellent game that I'm kind of done with. And the reason for that is because I don't know exactly where it was, maybe 6, maybe 7 hours in. At a certain point as I was playing this game, I stopped pretending to play the game. What I mean by that is I just stopped doing the other stuff. I continued to play an event card and then kind of ignore all the consequences of it. I started ignoring anytime it said combat, I just skipped directly to the combat resolution and pretended I won or lost, just moving on entirely. Whenever my characters had to do things like manage their health or whatever, I just started ignoring all of that, and I just started going through the procedural journey aspect. I continued using the event deck because I wanted to keep track of time in an abstracted sense, but I stopped doing skill checks. I stopped doing anything else except for simply moving, exploring, going down that pathway of the things in the game that were the most fun for me. And for a while, that was great. Again, I don't know exact numbers. Maybe say 6-7 hours in, I started doing that. And then another 3-4 hours in, that helped and kept me more engaged in the game and having a lot more fun as I got a whole lot more done a whole lot quicker, while kind of ignoring all these things that sort of got in the way. At the same time, the downside of engaging with the game that way is it takes away some of the fun of certain moments. The moments where you earn a new card and you're like, this card would be really useful if I was actually playing the game as opposed to just skipping it entirely. Finding the totems is still cool, finding the story elements is still cool, but the sense of progression kind of got taken away once I started skipping those elements. And if you're like, well then Alex, you shouldn't skip those elements, you're right, but I started to skip those elements because the game was starting to feel a bit more tedious to me. The good parts were hiding behind the okay parts, and it wasn't working as well for me as I would have liked. This goes back to the aspect that I said in the beginning, that I can see this game being heavily improved at 2 players for a variety of reasons. First of all, there's going to be a better ratio of story to maintenance because of the fact that at 2 players, you're going to discuss those story points more. When I'm engaged with the combat, I sit there and I take my time and I think through what the best way to engage with that is. When I'm trying to figure out which abilities to utilize to keep my characters, my boat, and all those things alive, I'm sitting there thinking through those optimal options, and I put a lot more thought into that. And so the ratio, as a single-player experience, the ratio of doing all that stuff to story ends up being much worse. I think as a 2-player game, you're going to have more discussions around the story points. Where do we want to explore? Where do we want to go? How do we want to interact with that person who just gave us a choice? I think that would drag out the story elements, making the story to mechanical interface ratio a better one. Additionally, controlling the characters. As a single-player game, you're controlling all 9 characters, which is a lot of stuff to keep track of. It's a lot of extra things, extra stuff, like they have an ability there, they have an ability there, that person's down to that health, I'll use their thing, I'm going to upgrade that character. There's just a lot of stuff, and I think that stuff would be lessened if you were playing it as a 2-player game, or even as a 3-player game, although I don't think 3 would improve it quite as much. And so I think that 2 players might not necessarily solve, but potentially make some aspects of what I was doing better. Contrasted with playing the solo, I really love elements of Sleeping Gods. And then there's a whole lot of stuff that I just like, and that stuff happens far too frequently. And skipping it entirely got me to a point where I was still having a lot of fun, but also the fun was lessened. And so I kind of feel like I'm darned if I do and I'm darned if I don't. Whichever way I choose to engage with the game, I feel like I'm not fully getting the ideal experience out of this one. And so this is where, as far as rating for me, I'm going to give it a Shelf-Side style rating. Shelf-Side, if you don't know, is a channel. I'll link them down below. But one of the things they do that's absolutely fantastic is they give a personal rating and a game rating. I don't often feel the need to do that because, I mean, ultimately my rating is a personal rating. How else can I rate the game if not for my personal opinion? But this is one of those times where I really feel mixed. For me, Sleeping Gods is a 3.5 out of 5. It's a really good game with elements that I love, but also a whole bunch of things that get in the way such that 10 plus hours in, I'm kind of ready to move on from it. At the same time, it's hard not to recognize that this is one of the most impressive games I've ever seen, and the elements that it does well, it does incredibly well, and I'm going to miss those elements. I'm going to miss the fact that there are multiple pages in this book that I have not even come close to touching, and the level of interaction, the level of depth and experience this game provides. As far as a shelf-side general audience, general game rating, I'm going to give it a 4.5 out of 5. For me, it's not there personally because of things that get in the way, and those things might be blockers to you as well. I have a hard time calling this a 3.5 without addressing the fact that it's one of the most incredible games I have ever seen, period. As far as other game recommendations, there's going to be 2 other games that I can think of that really, this gave me strong, reminiscent vibes of. The first is going to be ISS Vanguard, which you may still be able to late pledge over on GameFound, I don't know. But ISS Vanguard also had a large, epic story degree of interactions and a lot of things going on with mechanics that both got in the way while enabling the experience. There's a lot of overlays in terms of the way I felt engaging with both these experiences. And then for me, the one that I think feels very Sleeping Gods-ish in terms of the experience it gives is going to be Seventh Continent. And I personally like Seventh Continent better. And I say that as somebody who knows full well that if you go on the internet, you'll find a lot of people who say Sleeping Gods is the game that they wanted Seventh Continent to be, and so take that into account. For me, Seventh Continent is the game that I wanted Sleeping Gods to be, or is. There's many elements of Sleeping Gods that are better and cooler than Seventh Continent, but I think I just find the Seventh Continent experience doesn't feel like the maintenance stuff is... The story here, I think, is better. I think the story, the interaction, the way everything kind of connects together, I think that is far more impressive here. But the mechanical choices I make in Seventh Continent, I prefer to the mechanical choices I make in Sleeping Gods. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video. Probably should have said this at the beginning, but there's an upcoming GameFound campaign for Sleeping Gods Distant Skies, I believe it's called, which is the sequel, the standalone sequel to Sleeping Gods. You can check that out as well. And supposedly, I have heard that in some way, shape, or form, they're addressing some of the critiques around the base game, including potentially combat. Don't take my word for it. I think I've heard that, but I'm also not certain. Until next time, have a good one.